Hi everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. I'm usually peeking into offices and book spaces and bookshelves, and it looks like there's a very impressive vinyl collection in the space that I'm peeking into with J.H. Williams III. May I call you J.H.? Is that okay?
Yeah,
Or
yeah, that's great.
cool, cool. Well, really enjoying the view of all of the vinyl back there, and you're sporting some Iggy Pop as well.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
so it looks like a wonderful creative space to be in.
Yeah, you know, we try to play music a lot in the house uh during our work hours and stuff, rather than TV and things like that. But occasionally, sometimes we go with the TV. It just depends on our mood, but yeah, music is a big deal in our house. And this concert was incredible. So
Oh, I'm sure. I'm
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. Well, I usually mention a couple of titles, so people up there can kind of picture you making these things as you're listening to music. So, of course, Batwoman is a recent and large title. Promethea, one that's a little less recent. Echolands, as well as The Witness, something that you've
Oh
done
yeah, yeah.
with, yeah, J.M.D. Mateus. And you have, I believe, a Dracula sort of portfolio that is on the way from Image.
Yeah,
Is that right?
because they just sort of said that's I they we've been preparing the book for a little bit, and uh it still has to go through some production stuff, but um it was funny because the design assistant on it was like, oh yeah, no, it's already it's already on, the you know places where people can buy books, they can order it. I'm like, what?
They were
So
already spinning those wheels.
yeah, yeah, I wasn't going to uh make any posts about it or anything until I officially saw it in the order catalog.
Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'll probably still not really post anything about it until that point, because it's not going to be out until I think sometime in September.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm not sure what that means for the order catalog for a book like that. So
True enough. True enough. Well,
that's
it's
okay.
on the way at some point.
It's on the way. We can talk about it.
What typically these days is on the soundtrack as you're creating?
Oh, well, today we've just been listening to some Sirius XM.
Hmm.
Um, it was going to be a shorter day today, so and I got kind of a late start, so we just threw on uh, Dark Wave on Sirius XM.
Oh, nice. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, but yesterday I was listening to, well, not yesterday, the day before I was listening to all kinds of stuff, like Ex Cops. I don't know if you know what that is.
I don't. I don't. It sounds interesting
It's
though.
Yeah, it's a Gwar spin-off band.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's a really good record. Aggressive but good. Um, uh, I listened to a Federale album called No Justice. Do you know
Uh-huh.
Federale?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Incredible, incredible album. I've got all their albums. I've been super happy with all of them, and can't wait for them to put out another one. Another one. It's good stuff.
It sounds like the vibe is energetic as you're creating and working on things.
Yeah, sometimes I will want something that's really fast or aggressive, or have an intensity to it. But there's other times where I'm like, no, I just need to mellow out. Let's listen to, some classical, or maybe a slower paced jazz album, or stuff like that. It just depends whatever my mood is in. Sometimes I'll listen to soundtracks.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Uh-huh.
I enjoy that a lot. Sometimes, yeah, because sometimes depending on my mood, I don't want anything with lyrics.
Hmm.
So soundtracks are great for that, or classical's great for that. But it's always kind of my musical whims have very little to do with what I'm drawing, which
Oh yeah.
surprises
Uh-huh.
people,
Uh-huh.
because I listen to so much music, and I think part of that is because it takes me so long to do a page anyway that there's no way I can align the perfect music soundtrack for whatever it is I'm drawing. So it has to go by whatever my mood is, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I've done a lot of Chopin as I've been working on things. So I'm an English teacher, and so I like to ask about how folks initially get connected with creating. Were you one of those kids that drew in class and was always sort of
Unfortunately,
drawing
yes.
and stuff like that?
Yes. To the dismay of my teachers, you know. I remember taking some tests in high school and just doing so on the test. And if I was done ahead of time, I'd start doodling in the margins
Uh-huh,
and stuff.
uh-huh.
And when I would get the paper back, the graded paper back, they'd be like, "Nice drawing, though." So yeah.
I have an appreciation for that though. I teach essays, but then when I see some pictures in the margin, I'm like, I'm appreciating this right now. I really enjoy that.
I don't know how much they appreciated it, considering my grades were always just so. Uh, I wasn't a very good student in a lot of ways because I don't know. I think I was bored a lot,
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, and didn't like the. I didn't. I don't think I fit well with the. I don't know, the systematic way, teaching curriculums function and the whole process of it. I just never fit well with it.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know why that is, but that's just the way it was, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm one of those teachers that also did not fit well with the systematic way. So, yeah, I'm always trying not to be another brick in the wall. Always
It's
aiming for
interesting.
that.
Yeah, it's interesting because like the more academic, like traditionally academic the class was, the more difficulty I had.
Hmm.
Um, but probably there were a couple classes that I took that uh, I enjoyed a lot, and their approach to the class was completely different than other teachers. One of them was a history class, uh, and their focus was the Roman Empire, Alexander the Great, um, Greek history, and the way the teacher told it, it was at first intimidating because when I first went into the class, he's telling the class, he's like, "Look, you have to take notes in my class,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
90% of your grade will be on your notes." So yeah, and so he's like, "So you better pay attention." But what was cool is that it was sort of a little preamble for his process, and he tells history through story.
Oh, uh-huh. Yeah.
So he, instead of relying on dry textbooks, the language in textbooks, he actually conveyed it through story.
Yeah.
Um, and that was super fascinating. That engaged my mind a lot, probably because of the storytelling aspect of it. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I love the narrative. I love the way that stories work, and to have a teacher that kind of pulls that in works so well. But then getting to appreciate across genres, you were talking about that. I was thinking about all of the mythology, all of the history that really makes its way into things like Prometheus, Sandman, and
Oh,
the
yeah.
creating that you've done.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, I think that a lot of mythology ends up creeping into comic books, particularly comics that are about epic storytelling,
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
because those stories are so fantastical and they kind of inspire the imagination. So it makes sense that comics would kind of gravitate to some of that material and kind of absorb it into things.
Hmm.
Makes perfect sense to me in a lot of ways.
Yeah, yeah. Now you've worked with a number of authors, Alan Moore, Neil Gaiman being one of my favorites. What has it been like to work with people that are really at the top of their game in that way as far as storytelling?
Um, for me, I feel like I don't know what the magic trick is and how that occurred. Um, I'm lucky in a lot of ways because my resume is so vast in that area with working. with a lot of legendary people, um, super creative people.
Hmm.
Um, but the only thing I can think of is there was something that I was doing that they gravitated to. Uh, I couldn't necessarily put my finger on it, other than I try to put as much into the visuals as I can imagine,
Hmm.
um, in ways that might not be typical, I guess. And maybe that's what attracted these writers to what I was doing. And it just, each new project kind of drew attention of others,
Hmm. Hmm.
and for whatever reason, whatever I was doing inspired them to want to do a project with me. Um, and the only thing I can think of is because of my approach is kind of not typical.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I usually talk on here about how comics are kind of this unique way of storytelling. So that links to what you're saying there with bringing in kind of a space that can be atypical in that way.
Yeah, yeah. And I maybe also because a lot of those writers, that I've worked with, it's obvious in their work with others and the way they tell stories that they're interested in pushing, and trying to experiment and try new things.
Hmm.
And so I think because I had a similar attitude, they related to that,
Yeah,
and made them curious to see what they could do pairing up with somebody who's willing to jump off a cliff with them. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
Um, and to see what was possible, even if there's things that we did that might not work out the way we hoped they would. Like, it was still more about the process of trying to do the thing
Hmm.
rather than trying to finding reasons to say yes to do the thing, the weird thing that we're going to do, rather than finding reasons to say no, even if we weren't sure how it was going to work out. You know what I mean? It was all like a lot of trial and error stuff that we were doing. And
Yeah.
I think that that just has continued even further, into it's kind of gone from every project I've done. It's kind of been one more development in that direction of, just seeing what you can do,
Hmm.
um, toying with it.
Yeah, I love that playfulness and I love that kind of sense of, I guess, always challenging yourself in
Yeah,
that way that you bring to the page.
yeah, and in that process, I think maybe the other thing that attracted them to, I've never asked this question to any of the people I've worked with, so I can
Hmm.
only
Hmm.
kind of like wonder. And so, since we were working in a sequential form, a story for storytelling, I wonder if one of the other things that they were attracted to is, even though my work would be atypical in the way I would approach scenes or construction of scenes, uh, or whole issues, that I still remain focused on clarity of story,
Hmm. Hmm.
even though we were doing weird stuff.
Yeah.
And so that maybe that was another reason why they're like, hey, let's try working with this person, because it was sort of straddling both worlds of formalism and, experimentalism at the same time. You
Hmm.
know, yeah,
But as the artist, you get to bring your sense of storytelling as well. It's not a straight
yes,
adaptation. So that's kind of a cool aspect of your work and of comics is that
yeah,
you get to
yeah,
put your spin on things and envision the page also and kind of make changes here and there as you're able.
yeah, yeah. And I think that if somebody was to go back and do a, a comprehensive rereading of the various projects I've done from the early days to now, then they would see that consistency of, trying different things, and then maybe there's so much, in today's comics reality, there's so much, onus put on what the writer is doing,
Hmm. Hmm.
and a lot of it's not purposeful, but there's a kind of an unpurposeful neglect of what the artists do for comics. And
Hmm.
it's surprising because it is a visual medium. So I think if somebody was tracking my projects from, from project to project to project, they would see that consistency of the weirdness coming through. Um, uh, and hopefully would be able to see how much an artist does bring to the table, because the fact that I don't necessarily work traditionally, so I'm a little less, my work is a little less expected, I guess,
Hmm. Hmm.
where a lot of most comics have a typical aspect to them, and in the way they function. And I think because of that, potentially artists sometimes can get um, relegated to second fiddle
Hmm.
on a project because they're adhering so much to form, and therefore the readers responding, and when they're saying, oh, how great the writing is, they're actually responding to the entire thing. But
Yeah.
a lot of times the art can get relegated to that second fiddle stage, and the success of how much they like the story gets put more in favor of the writer when it's actually both people involved. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah.
then the
It's
colorist and what the letterer does too, right? It's all integral to the final product. And I it's interesting that people sometimes don't think about that,
hmm. Hmm.
unless if they're like deep into comics history and they're all about exploring how these things are made and how all of it. Then those fans have a much more greater understanding of how it functions and why the end result is the way it is. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know what caused that kind of schism
Hmm.
or split in thinking, where things got compartmentalized in such a way where different aspects of the creative team got more prominence than others. It's
Yeah.
really interesting. I don't know where that started. Perhaps potentially it started with how much a publisher like DC, let's say,
Hmm.
put on uh, the quality of writing that Alan Moore did.
Right.
And
Right.
so they got to a point where they were pushing, oh, here's the Alan Moore thing. Never mind, it's Alan, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Uh, and so it got to a point where it was maybe out of convenience easier, because at that time they were trying to go after the book market, right?
Hmm.
When Watchmen was coming out, the comics in the bigger book market weren't really a thing.
Right.
And so it might have been also a matter of convenience, where when they went after that market, it was easier to promote the single name rather than the team.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
maybe that's how that developed, and that kind of sunk into the subconscious psyche of the readership over time. As I don't know, I'm just spitballing.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about and how much it's like film and unlike film with things like auteur theory. And I mean, it's easy to kind of make that jump, but then, as you were saying, there's so much that goes into a printed page that it's almost like eating something that's delicious and then saying, "Oh, well, I'd like it separated out, please." You
Right.
know,
Yeah,
it
right.
just doesn't work quite that way.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So I mean, lately I've been referring to projects because this kind of is a topic that comes up in social media relatively often lately,
Mhm.
about that whole dynamic. And I just tell people, I refer to it as like the writing and the art are both the authorship.
Yeah, yeah.
There's no other way you can realistically explain it because of the way the medium works, right?
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. When you have taken the role of writer, you've taken that as part of the what I'll call like the masthead role in books like Echoland. So I imagine that was a pretty natural kind of step because you were already involved in so much of the storytelling aspect.
It still was a big learning curve because I wasn't used to writing scripts.
Hmm.
Um, but when I before I got into the comics field, um, just as a creative individual, I never saw myself as just a comic artist. I
Hmm.
always was coming up with, you know, different story ideas, different concepts, uh, that went beyond just, oh, here's a cool character. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
uh, and so I think that's probably what led me to pursue the more uh, the deeper dive into the writing side of it.
hmm,
Uh, and my first taste of getting to write professionally was when um, Dan Johnson and I did Chase. Um, and so I worked heavily on the plots and stuff, and Dan did a lot of the scripting. Uh, but then we also co-wrote Batman Snow, and
hmm,
that
hmm.
that I had a bigger role in the scripting. And then around that time, that's probably around the time I was getting hooked up with Alan, and reading those scripts from him.
Yeah.
And that's where I learned a lot about the craft of writing scripts. Um, and so when the opportunity came up to take on a more substantial role on that side of the creative process, with Batwoman, that was my opportunity to see what I could do and bring to the table. Granted, I worked with Hayden Blackman on that too, so we were functioning as a writing team. Uh, so that was kind of an interesting process because for me, I tackled the script writing
Hmm.
even though I was going to be drawing it,
Yeah.
but I treated the script writing as if I would be writing it for anyone else. Um, and I just have kind of kept that momentum going. Uh, and that'll be more evident in the future as other projects I'm working on, where I'm just in the writer role,
Hmm. Hmm.
start to come out. Because ultimately, as much as I love doing the art, I always feel like, I guess it kind of boils back down to where we were talking about the art is a form of writing,
Hmm.
right? It's
Hmm.
part of the storytelling. And so I think I've always just envisioned myself as a storyteller, not just an illustrator.
Yeah, yeah. But I like that move to envisioning your art beyond just one medium and envisioning what you do in comics is more than just in comics because storytelling is something that really permeates,
Yeah.
which brings me, of course, to The Witness as well and the work you do
Oh,
there, illustrating with J.M. DeMatteis. So I imagine that's a little bit of a different process too, of kind of
yeah.
distilling it down to those single images.
Yeah, that was interesting. I got kind of the opportunity to do something similar to that, to the Dracula thing that we were talking about
Hmm.
uh,
Hmm.
previously. Um, so this was kind of another take on that idea of doing illustrations for a novel. And the way that process worked was I got to read the novel ahead of time, uh, and kind of was like, okay, here's the scenes that I think would be ideal. At first, I asked JM, I'm like, is there any scenes you want me to focus on? Like, what do you want to see? And he kind of was pretty hands off about that. He's like, let me see what you come up with, a list of scenes, and then we'll go from there.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so basically, after I read the novel, I just wrote a simple paragraph for each illustration the way I saw it, um, and handed that over. And then we kind of negotiated a little bit about, oh, well, is that scene really necessary, or is there a way to combine something, little
Hmm.
tidbits of stuff like that. Uh, that was an interesting process because like there was some stuff he really wanted to see, and there was stuff where I'm like, Like, no, we have to do that scene. We
You
have to
already
do
have the
that.
vision.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, so that's kind of a cool thing, getting to bring bits of a novel to visual life.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was super fun. I love doing that.
Yeah, yeah. But
And it's a little bit more freeing, I guess you could say, than working on a comic. That would probably be another key difference, is because with a comic, you have to worry about how does panel one relate to panel two, or how panel one even relates to panel four, that kind of thing, where doing illustrations for a novel, focusing on basically distilling down a section of a novel into one key visual,
mhm.
is kind of an interesting take. It's almost like doing a cover for a comic,
Yeah, yeah, I can see
where,
that. Yeah.
where it's like you select the image that you think is the most potent, um, and it's a little freeing because you don't have to worry about the panel by panel progression. You're just
Mhm.
like, here's the shot, you know, and then just go for it. So it's cool.
Yeah,
I like
definitely.
I'm happy with what we did on The Witness. It brought out some different things in in my visual storytelling, I guess you could say, because the approach that we took, I like it. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, they're very, it's striking imagery too.
cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Uh, Now, I was going to mention that it's International Women's Day today.
Mm-hmm.
And so just also noting your work on Batwoman and kind of the cool shift in comics, and that we have characters that are centralized, that are female, that
Yeah,
are LGBTQ plus community representative, and things of that nature, and multiple experiences. So just appreciating that work as well, and noting that character, one of the interesting turns in the Batman
yeah,
mythology in the past few years.
yeah. And I love to see that kind of thing. I mean, personally, as a reader, um, I don't know how it is for a lot of other readers in terms of the types of characters they like to read about, but I like to read about people that are completely different than myself.
Hmm, hmm,
I don't want to necessarily see myself represented on the page. And I kind of tackle my writing in the same way. I don't want to see myself represented on the page. I want to immerse myself into, well, who is this person that I'm writing about? They're not just a character, they're a person.
hmm.
Um, and I think because of that, I've always kind of been attracted to uh, working with female characters. Um, Huge portions of my career are devoted to that. I never really thought about that much until another interview I did last year, where that sort of came up, where they're like, you realize, how much of your career has been focused on female characters. Was that purposeful? Was kind of the question. And I'm like, oh, no, I guess it's not purposeful, but, you know, but I gravitate to that I just think it's more interesting for me as a creator, while at the same time uh, giving a space for those types of characters to be out there. Um, I always heard stories about, particularly with the big two publishers, how uh, stories focused on their female creators just weren't performing as well as the male figures, and I just never could understand that. I, I don't know. I've always thought that was weird, um, but I do like how the last probably decade, I would say, right,
Hmm.
where female characters have become more prominent, and it's across the board. It's not just comics, right? You see it happening in novels and television and film, but I still feel like there's still not a balance there between uh, female driven creator characters and male driven characters. It still seems like there's an out of balance thing going on there, and I don't quite understand why that is, because particularly with the growing female readership, I mean, the female readership is much bigger and has been bigger, uh, even in the past, than people give it credit for.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's fascinating to me that there's still like an off balance thing going on there. I don't know why that is. Um, but I don't know. And so, I'd always gravitate to the characters I work on, um, and just focus on who those characters are rather than worrying about how successful that book could be because it's
Mm-hmm.
male or female centered.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of concern wrapped up in that, and maybe that has something to do with some of the decisions made in the publishing world. I don't know. Uh, but I think as a society that embraces stories, we need to kind of let that dynamic go to the wayside and just
Mm-hmm.
be willing to dive into reading about characters that you have nothing in common with.
Yeah.
That's how you learn about other people. Because you know what I mean?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I guess I'm deeply involved in creating the type of comic I want to read.
Love it, love it. I love it. Yeah. Well, and it's a cool thing that happens because if you're like me, you get to read about an experience that maybe you don't know about, but then you also kind of start to see yourself and you start to see some of your experiences too that kind of reflect back here and there. But it's a
Yeah,
very cool thing, these human connections we make in books.
yeah, especially if you approach take absorbing stories with an empathic nature
Hmm. Hmm.
in the way you relate to the characters, even though the characters could be living a completely different life than yourself or completely different gender than yourself. Uh, you should be able to put yourself in their shoes.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know what I mean? And relate to, wow, that was messed up what happened to them. I would hate for that to happen to me, or look how great that was that happened to them. I hope something great like that happens to me,
Yeah.
even though the character's living a completely different type of life than you. So I think as long as we can, as readers, can approach stories with empathy and the characters with empathy, that's the key to being able to, like you said, understanding people.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know,
Very well said. Yeah. Yeah. Um, absolutely, absolutely. And I appreciate that you think about that as a storyteller. And it sounds like you were saying that there are some things that you're writing that are on the way in
yeah,
development out
yeah,
there coming to be. So that's also very exciting.
yeah. Backtracking just a slight bit.
Yeah. Hmm.
I would say, even though even though I write characters that are completely different than myself,
Hmm. Hmm.
I think the trick to it is understanding I don't see them as characters. I see them as people, and I'm just getting to peek in on their life and
Yeah.
tell you about it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I think that's key. Because I think when it's easy to fall into the trap of, if a character is viewed as just a character, then it's just a vehicle for becoming a commodity
Hmm. Hmm.
rather than a study, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, the other some of my other projects I got going on, we mentioned that Dracula thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's going to be an interesting book for people. I hope they like it. I don't think I've quite seen anything quite like it before, but essentially we're billing it as a storybook portfolio.
Love it.
So so it's got illustrations with brief um, excuse me, brief text passages that I've written to accompany each illustration that kind of carry you through the story.
Oh, nice, nice.
Yeah, so um, it's kind of different. And I think the reason why I wanted to approach it, because I wanted to create something that was like reminded me of old storybooks, like even kids' storybooks, where it was like this simplistic presentation of a tale with a visual component to it,
Hmm.
but I've adultified that. So that idea, and wrote something that it's not for kids, but it's got the same structural setup, I guess you could say, as a storybook. I thought that was kind of an interesting way to go about it. It was fun, challenging.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it was. I had a lot of fun in the design process too, figuring out how it's going to be set up with the all the design aspects, and I wasn't sure because I hadn't quite done anything like that myself. I hadn't quite seen anything quite like it myself elsewhere. So I was like, is this something anyone's actually gonna care about? Is this gonna be cool? You know, trying to get the publisher's, opinion about it. Like, oh, is this actually cool? You know, it was such a fascinating process. And then the other thing I'm working on is there's a 10 issue series, comic series. Don't know when it's going to come out. And then there will be an OGN, uh,
Oh, nice.
a rather sizable one too. I'm not sure when that's coming out either. Um, and there'll be some other things after that currently developing. So
Cool.
hopefully they'll all get to be on the shelf someday.
Anything that you'd like to mention about any of the upcoming projects that you can? I know that sometimes those things are under wraps. I will say, I know DC has an Elseworlds line. They're doing 4 or 5 titles. I hope that they have asked you, will ask you, would ask you to come back. Even if you would decline, I hope they would ask. So just going to put that out there as somebody that's worked in kind of the early Elseworlds titles and really helped establish some of that universe.
Yeah, I haven't been approached for Elseworlds stuff. Um, the last offer I got from DC, well, because I was doing some Detective Comics covers,
Hmm. Hmm.
and the editor, Jessica Chen, who's moved on from there now, uh, was kind of just had like an open door offer. It's like, whatever you would like to do. But I'm
Nice.
busy with the Echolands stuff, so um, I bet she ended up following up with that at a later date, asking if I would consider if I had thought about maybe coming back and finishing up our what we were going to do with Batwoman.
Hmm. Hmm.
But schedules wouldn't allow that for for sure because Echolands is a long project. I'm in the middle of drawing book two now,
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
or arc two. Um, Pages are sitting on my table to the side of me, but um, uh, and also what we had planned for Batwoman is because she was like, it could be like a Black Label miniseries or something like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
And what we had planned uh, would take us well beyond a miniseries. It was easily what we originally were going to do was easily another 2 years of storytelling.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so, and I also was like, well, even if we tried it, I don't know how we could do it and bring it back to what we were going to do
Hmm.
without having a disregard for what other people have done since.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because for me, I feel like some continuity with characters is important, especially with a character that doesn't always have uh, the limelight.
Hmm. Hmm.
And and so I kind of feel like, well, to do the character justice, I'd want to be able to not disregard what other people did, but at the same time, how do I make that align with where we were going? Because where we were going was going to be so very, very specific,
Yeah.
and B, it's such a unique thing. And so I kind of outlined to her, in a, set of paragraphs, like this is all the stuff we were going to do. I don't, so I don't know how we do that and not disregard what other people did after we left abruptly like we had to. Um, and so I just said, I just don't know how that's possible,
Yeah.
especially with the Echoland schedule, because I said it's easily 2 years. And I think that's when effort, that was in a reply, I think, to when they said, well, maybe it could be black labeled, so it's sort of isolated.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, which I could maybe understand that, but at the same time, would it be considered canon? You know, I
Yeah.
don't know about how much of the black label stuff is considered like canon material, and I don't know. I guess there's a set of readers out there that would like to see it. I
Hmm.
just don't, I just don't know if it's ever really possible to do it. You know,
Yeah.
uh, the 2 year, 24 issues of storytelling is a lot,
Hmm.
particularly when we try to tackle things so meticulously, uh, and try to, yeah. It would be great to, like, it would be a certain personal gratification to be able to tell what we were planning. It
Hmm.
was gonna be bonkers, but at the same time, it's like it'd be hard to go back, I think, to that, for a multitude of reasons. So,
Yeah. It'd be interesting to explore as a novel, even.
oh, uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've briefly talked about, Hayden and I, on Echolands. We could we've talked about it might be interesting to do a novelization
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
of Echolands. But it's not something we'd want to consider until the comic is done, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, but I think it'd be interesting because then some of the some of the world building details that are in the visuals, um, that aren't necessarily discussed from the
Hmm.
characters, would have a more prominence.
Hmm.
Even
Hmm.
though all that stuff is in the comic, in a prose novel, it would read way, way differently, right?
Yeah.
The types of information that would be conveyed would be fascinating. Um, uh, but turning comic story ideas into novels is not something. Um, I will backtrack about that a little bit. It is something that I've thought about before.
Hmm.
So there's a concept I have with a writing partner of mine that is, uh, best described as Lynchian horror.
Oh, nice. Nice. Uh-huh.
Um, and we first developed it as a series of miniseries for comics. But as we started, after we were done with developing each arc of what it potentially could be, we were like, this would make a killer novel,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know. And
Yeah.
so that's been percolating in the back of our minds, is maybe switching the medium for it. Um, this is a matter of time, really, that prevents you from being able to focus on that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But
Um,
yeah, the Elseworld stuff, I loved when I got to do, that Western Elseworlds, the JLA Western thing.
yeah, the Justice Riders. I enjoyed
Yeah.
that one a great deal. One of the um stellar titles from that. So it would be very nice of them to extend the invitation, even if you weren't able. But Echolands is an amazing kind of world building that you do there, and I'm a science fiction fan, so
Oh, cool.
I appreciate the storytelling and getting to play with parts of society in slightly different ways that goes on there
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think Echolands, it's going to be a long project. Probably the longest project I will have done, uh, outside of Promethea, probably,
Hmm. Hmm.
in terms of the number of chapters it's going to take to tell it. And then by the end of it, what we will have set up, uh, potentially we could just keep going. It's going to be such a, diverse world that we've all what we've shown so far in volume one just scrapes the surface
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
of how diverse this reality is that we've created. And so we Hayden and I both feel like there's an endless number of stories that can be told in the Echolands world. It doesn't have to just be this current cast that we're focused on right now. It could be a whole different set of characters because it's such a diverse, vast world. And that's super exciting as a creator, the whole world building aspect, even though it can be daunting, it can be
Mhm.
exhausting. Um, it's tricky to like, especially like, wait, what did we say here? Right, we can't forget that because if we forget that, we're gonna mess this up over here,
Yeah.
that kind
Yeah.
of thing, because you're dealing with such a vast concept. But by the time the main series we get to the conclusion, what I've been telling people, even in the early interviews, which uh, all of that will be forgotten by the time this actually is done rolling out. Um, it's an adventure tale
Mhm.
with all these science fiction tropes mashed together with mythology and fantasy tropes, uh, and it has this kind of fun ride aspect to it, where it's just like this thing is trucking along, and the fun of the series is in the reveals of the world being set forth before you.
Yeah.
Um, but by the end of it, with what we're going to do with the story itself, I'm hoping we'll have accomplished what some of the best science fiction accomplishes that are more action-packed type of storytelling, where by the end you actually now are saying something for people to think about,
Hmm. Hmm.
something profound that can, even though you're talking about this future strange world, that the themes by the end, the themes within it, people can go, oh, I see how that relates to things today in our
Yeah.
own.
Yeah.
That's what our goal is, and that if we pull that off, you know, that I feel like that will give the series the longevity aspect rather than it's everyone loves a great adventure tale and just have some fun.
Hmm.
But the things that are the most memorable are the things that have something to say,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So like, like all I don't know, all the best science fiction that has something to say, especially if they're it's saying something about humanity, right?
Hmm.
Bringing it back to the human, no matter how crazy vast cool the concept is, if you're not bringing it back to the exploring the human aspect, it gets lost. It becomes unrelatable. So
Yeah. I totally agree, and that's one of the things I love about the genre. So looking forward to seeing how you pull it all together.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's gonna get weird. It's already
In the
weird,
best
but it's gonna
ways.
get extra weird.
In the best of all ways, I'm sure.
Yes.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Weird is just another word for innovation, so that works.
You're right.
Well, I think I have one more official question that I usually ask on these. I like to give folks the space to talk about online places where people can go, things of that nature. We live in a world of many fractured social medias, so anything like that that you'd like to mention, as well as web spaces. We've talked about several projects, so anywhere that you would kind of point people to find out a little bit more.
Um, well, I have a website, but it's relatively defunct. JHWilliams number 3.com. But it's in sore need of being completely refurbished. I don't know how we're going to get that done. I don't have the time or the expertise on how to do that efficiently. Um, uh, but it needs a serious overhaul. So it's pretty out of date. Um, but I do post regularly on Twitter
Hmm. Hmm.
uh, and Instagram, under J.H. Williams III, or it's at J.H. Williams III. Um, uh, and so I post stuff on there. But a lot of times I'm not necessarily posting about my work.
Yeah.
Um, um, Probably on Instagram, I post more about my work than I do on Twitter because Twitter is a little bit more set for conversational aspects.
Hmm.
Um, but I've been, over the last couple of years, been posting images here and there of the next Echolands arc. as I work on little tidbits, so people can find stuff that way. And that's usually where like whenever I post about that Dracula thing, that's where it'll show up.
Mhm.
Besides Image Comics' own push for it whenever they're ready to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, cool, cool. I'll be sure and link the Instagram. Have we missed anything that you'd like to mention? Any closing words of creative wisdom?
Oh, uh, we haven't really missed anything. As far as creative wisdom, that's always tough because every creator's experience is different. Um,
Have
the
a
number one
playlist, right? Have a musical
playlist,
playlist. Hmm.
yeah, I do post that a lot. I post my music playing a lot. I've been remiss about that for the last few months or so, but I started posting stuff again. Like, here's what I listened to today.
Nice.
Uh, but in terms of creative wisdom for aspiring creators, the number one thing that I posted on Instagram, it's probably off of there already because I did it in stories,
Hmm.
but there was a really great couple quotes from one from Rick Rubin, a super famous music producer, about creativity, one from David Bowie about creativity. Uh, the thing I liked about the David Bowie one was he sort of was talking about don't work in spaces where you feel completely comfortable.
Hmm.
Uh, you, if you're working in on stuff and you feel kind of uncomfortable about it, he says that's the place you want to be. And he also was talking about um, don't worry about creating for others' expectations.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, I guess it kind of goes back to like what I was saying about I try to create comics to be the type of comics I would read.
Hmm. Hmm.
So a lot of that stuff, as much as I want them to find an audience and have readership, a lot of the stuff is like it's for me. I'm doing it for me,
Yeah.
you know. So I try to divorce expectations out of it. It's always nice when you see some, readers respond to something and they're like, "Oh, this is cool. I like this," or the sales are good, or whatever. That's always the cherry on top. And you're like, "Oh, cool. This person, it reached this person. They like it. They understand what, that we're trying to do something interesting or whatever."
Hmm.
Ultimately, I try to not get hung up on that and just create what I want to create, and hopefully people will dig it. It's that sort of space. And I think that's the best thing I could say to upcoming creators is don't worry about how popular your thing that you're working on is going to be, as long as you feel like it's representative of what you want to do and want to say.
Hmm. Hmm.
Someone out there, if you think it's cool and interesting, someone else eventually will as well, even
Yeah.
if it takes a while to reach that audience, you know. So
Yeah. Love that. Love that. Again, very well said. JH, thank you for the time, the talk, and the work that you've done. And glad to have you back anytime, of course. Of course.
yeah, and anytime. I know it took a while for us to get this set up because
You've been
holidays
busy.
came and then
Yeah.
chaos in the world and whatever, you know. But yeah, no, great to have a conversation with you, and I'd be more than happy to come back anytime.
Well, thank you
Thank
so much. Thank you so much. I will be in touch.